On August 15th, 1944, at a little after 7 in the morning, the sky over the Mediterranean coast of southern France was so clear it felt almost cruel. Sunlight poured down without the slightest obstruction onto a formation of steel aircraft, making every riveted seam gleam. A group of 12 B-17G flying fortresses, nicknamed the Citadel Formation, held a steady advance inland at a cruising speed of 280 kilometers an hour. Their shadows, neat and silent as a string of ellipses, skimmed swiftly over shattered fields and blackened stands of trees below, marks left by the repeated grinding back and forth between German rearguards and Allied spearheads in the wake of Operation Dragoon's landings. Lieutenant Luke Harper rested his fingers on the control stick of his P-51 Mustang in a posture of almost relaxed alertness. His aircraft, Sentinel-1, prowled about 500 meters off the formation's right rear at a slightly offset height, and together with his wingman formed a loose protective fan. In his headphones, the constant, even thunder of engines filled the world, interrupted now and then by brief calls as pilots reported heading and altitude. Everything was according to procedure. The pre-flight briefing had said the target was a critical rail bridge on a tributary of the Rhone, a span the Germans were using to push material north during their withdrawal. The escort fighter's job, beyond driving off any German interceptors, was to conduct one last low, fast reconnaissance run before the bombers committed to their final bomb run, confirming there were no suddenly emplaced flak positions or unusual deployments in the target area. It was a civilized kind of tactical routine written into every escort fighter pilot's handbook. Luke glanced at the cockpit clock. In about 8 minutes, he would push the nose over, dive down, and make the recon pass, less than 30 seconds of flight that was supposed to settle everything. He tugged his oxygen mask into a more comfortable position and realized his throat felt dry. This was his 13th combat mission, no longer green, not yet an old hand. He had seen flak burst into black clouds around his fuselage. He had ridden the tail of an FW-190 in a turning fight. But most of the time, war for him was this: long waiting in high-altitude cruise with the engine noise filling his skull and the execution of procedures timed down to the second. The system he served was huge and precise, like a machine of interlocking gears, and he was just one tooth designed to move along a prescribed track. He trusted that machine the way he trusted the parachute under his seat. Not something he expected to use, but the condition that made it possible to climb into the sky at all. In the cockpit of the lead B-17, call sign Citadel Lead, Major James McCall stared through the windscreen at a boundless blue ahead. As the formation commander, his world was layered with more information than Luke's, coordinates the navigator corrected continuously against the map. The bombardiers repeated calibrations of the aiming point through the Norden bomb site, the occasional encrypted signal the radio operator received from rear headquarters. Now the bombardier's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional. Lead, estimate 4 minutes to initial point. Weather over target good. No cloud cover. McCall answered briefly. Roger. His finger tapped lightly along the edge of the chart on his knee. He had studied the reconnaissance photograph of the bridge. In black and white, it was only a thin geometric structure spanning a ribbon of water, with notations beside it for distance, altitude, recommended bomb angle. Intelligence assessed that destroying it would delay the withdrawal of at least one German armored division by 48 hours, a clear, quantifiable military value. McCall had been in uniform for 8 years. From flight school to the front, one of the core principles he had learned was this: clear orders and reliable intelligence were the most effective tools for cutting through the fog of war and reducing friendly losses. Personal doubt and emotion in the face of a vast operational machine were variables that had to be strictly managed. He looked out at the other B-17s. They held a textbook box formation, each aircraft carrying 10 crewmen and nearly 3 tons of bombs. The shape itself was an emblem of efficiency, mutual support, collective safety. He pressed the transmit switch. His voice carried over VHF to the entire group. All units, this is Citadel Lead, approaching target area. Hold formation. Execute as planned. Over. No flourish, no drama, only the kind of certainty hammered into a commander until it could steady other men's hands. That certainty was the most important thing he could give his crews. Luke shoved the stick forward. Sentinel-1's nose dropped sharply. The Rolls-Royce Merlion up front gave a bright, eager roar as it hauled him out of cruise altitude and drove him into a steepening dive. The altimeter needle spun backward, 6,000 meters, 5,000, 4,000. Air thickened. The airframe began to tremble slightly. Luke had the recon route memorized. Approach the bridge from the southeast, streak across the deck at low level, pull up to look over the north abutment, then climb hard back to the bomber stream. The landscape that had been an indistinct wash of color tightened into sharp shapes. A winding river lay like a gray-green ribbon. Villages scattered through the valley looked like toys. Rails flashed a hard, cold gleam in the sun. The bridge appeared dead ahead. It was longer than he had imagined, and the steel trusswork resolved into complicated geometry as it swelled toward him. Final adjustments. Airspeed climbed to 550 kilometers an hour. Altitude fell below 800 meters. This was the most vulnerable phase, and the clearest moment to see. His eyes raked the bridge structure, the piers, the roads on either end, searching for gun pits, sandbags, vehicles, signs of troops. Then he saw people. Not a few scattered figures, not a marching column, a mass, crowded, writhing, nearly covering the entire span. He closed distance, and details hit his retina like a splash of ice water. Wagons, many wagons, wheels jammed in the seams of the bridge planking, hand carts piled with bundles, children carried in arms or dragged along by hands, elderly men and women shuffling forward, people in dark coats and skirts, hats pulled low, no uniforms, no cadence, no order. Only a desperate human slurry pushing north across the bridge. He could even make out, in some upturned faces, the blurred but unmistakable shape of terror. Time stretched and snapped in the shock. The dive's howl seemed to vanish. The background hiss of formation traffic in his headset dropped away. The world narrowed to that hellish image and the frantic pounding in his chest. The intelligence was wrong. The premise behind the order was catastrophically wrong. The bridge was not a clean military target. It was a death trap crammed with perhaps hundreds of civilians. His body moved before his mind could finish the thought. Left hand slammed the throttle forward. Right hand hauled back on the stick. The Mustang's nose snapped up. The G-load crushed him into the seat. The edges of his vision dimmed. The engine bellowed as the aircraft clawed almost vertically into a climb, escaping the suffocating picture below. His mind ran hot under adrenaline and strain, thoughts colliding in jagged fragments. Did I see it right? I couldn't have... No, there were too many. Procedure says report anomalies, but is this an anomaly? This is a different world. Command chain. I have to tell Led now. As the Mustang leveled and swung back toward the bomber stream, his thumb was already on the transmit switch. Every lesson about radio discipline, about calm and concise calls, broke apart under something more primitive. His voice burst out across the channel, raw and hoarse, a shout that cut through static into every ear wearing a headset. Citadel Lead, this is Sentinel-1. The bridge is not troops, it's civilians. Repeat, the whole span is refugees, wagons, carts, children, people everywhere. You can't drop. Repeat, you can't drop. For a heartbeat, the radio went empty, vacuum, silent, as if the words had pulled all air out of the frequency. Seconds later, McCall's voice came back, still shaped into a command cadence, but with a tension threaded through it. Sentinel-1, this is Lead. Report your confirmation altitude and observation angle. Over. Luke gulped air, trying to force control into his tone. The words still came out like rounds. Altitude under 300 meters straight across the deck, head on. I saw it clearly. Lead, hundreds at least. All civilians. No military vehicles, no armed personnel. Intelligence is wrong. Another voice cut in. Citadel 3's bombardier. Professional skepticism in every syllable. Lead. Through the sight, the target area is bridge structure only. No large personnel concentration observed. Could Sentinel-1 be mistaking shadows or debris? "It's not shadows," Luke almost screamed. He was still climbing back toward escort position, but his eyes stayed glued to the thin line of the bridge below. I was within 200 meters of them. I saw faces, clothes, living people. Your sight can't resolve it from that altitude and angle. Low level is a different truth. Sentinel-1, maintain channel discipline and control your tone. McCall's voice hardened, the familiar suppressive edge of command. All units continue as planned toward the run-in. Citadel 3, report final aiming parameters. Lead. Luke's voice broke into its first note of pleading, edged with something like despair. Please, believe me. Send one more fighter down for a look. One glance, we can't bomb that bridge. It's full of innocent people. The formation flew on, smooth and implacable, each second shortening the distance to the release point. Luke's Mustang finally slid back into escort position, but now it didn't feel like protection. It felt like a glaring, insistent question mark. McCall sat in the lead ship's left seat. Ahead lay a wide, ordinary sky. In his headset, he carried two realities that could not be reconciled. One was paper intelligence, clear orders, the abstract target point in the bomb site that matched every logic of attack. The other was the report of a trusted young pilot, fresh from a near-suicidal recon pass, shouting about hundreds of civilian lives. Doctrine told him the first was the foundation of action, the second was a variable to be verified and usually subordinated to the first. Yet something deeper and older thudded in his chest. The instrument panel glowed with cold light. The arrow on the chart pointed without mercy toward the bridge. And that bridge, in Luke's words, was no longer a coordinate. It was a vast grave they were about to build with their own hands. Time advanced with fuel burn and airspeed second by second, dragging him and the entire formation toward the point where a final decision had to be made. And what should the decision be anchored to? The orders of a huge, precise war machine that had rarely failed, or the truth seen by a young man's eyes, something no optical instrument could quantify? Luke's report landed like a stone in still water. After the brief silence, the VHF channel flared into confusion. "My God, is he serious?" a young voice blurted from the tail end of the formation, some co-pilot who hadn't even keyed his mic properly, before a harsher voice snapped, "Channel discipline!" McCall came on again, clinging to the calm shell of command, though the pressure made every word feel tight. Sentinel-1, your report is in direct conflict with pre-mission intelligence. Confirm. Did you observe any military elements mixed in? Any indication of armed personnel? The question pointed at the gray area of rules of engagement. What if a military objective was intermingled with civilians? Where did responsibility and authority fall? It was an attempt to find an explanation inside the existing frame. "No!" Luke cut off every technical escape route. His voice still shook, but a grim clarity had taken over. "Lead! I swear on my wings. No uniforms, no weapons, only civilians. Elderly, women, kids, running for their lives. That's not a military target. That's a massacre, and we're the ones about to pull the trigger." Citadel 3's bombardier came in again, the stubbornness of a technician and a prickle of offense at his professionalism being doubted. "Lead, I confirm again through the Norden. Bridge structure is clear. No abnormal movement patterns in the vicinity. With current magnification and visibility, if there were that many people on the deck, I could not fail to see at least a massed outline. Sentinel-1, could low-altitude, high-speed flight be affecting your perception? Vertigo, refraction. A grotesque debate unfolded at 4,500 meters, carried by radio waves, high-altitude truth, founded on precision optics and fixed procedure against low-altitude truth, glimpsed by a body of flesh at 300 meters. Other crews joined in, voices rising and overlapping. Maybe the Germans are using civilians as shields. Intel mentioned that kind of thing, but the order is to drop on the bridge to stop the withdrawal. Doesn't matter what's on it, right? We're low on fuel margin. A second confirmation run is too risky. Flak isn't a rumor out here. But he saw them. If he's right, Jesus, we're talking about hundreds of lives. In McCall's cockpit, the radio noise was still spilling in when the radio operator handed him a freshly decrypted message from rear headquarters. It was only a few cold words. Attack as planned. Maintain heading. The steel outline of command grew sharper in the voice traffic. McCall glanced at the navigator. The man silently pointed to the chart. Less than 2 minutes to the final bomb run. Once they entered that invisible pipe, the formation would be like a train on rails, locked to direction, speed, altitude, until release. The golden procedure that ensured hit probability now felt like a conveyor belt into hell. Lead, Luke said again, this time less a scream than a sound that made the skin tighten. They're down there. They're just like people on our streets back home. We didn't come all this way. We didn't lose so many men for this. Please. McCall did not answer immediately. He looked at his bombardier, the young sergeant with leather helmet clamped tight, eyes glued to the bomb sight eyepiece, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at his co-pilot, who avoided his gaze, fingers tapping unconsciously on the panel. Inside the ship, the usual oiled calm of procedure was gone, replaced by a taut silence charged with moral static. Everyone understood the decision belonged to the lead ship. Everyone also understood that the weight of each man's conscience was being stacked onto one pair of shoulders. This was not a split-second kill or be killed choice. This was time enough to think, and no amount of thinking that did not lead to a cliff. The system McCall had built his life on, reliable intelligence, clear orders, precision procedure, was telling him, drop. The only thing resisting that system was a young pilot's eyes and a gut certainty that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. All units, McCall said at last, voice hoarse but heavy with finality. Prepare to enter final bomb run. Hold formation. He paused, as if the words had emptied his lungs. Sentinel-1, your report is logged, but the mission continues. It sounded like a gate slamming shut. The argument on the channel died. Only the faint hiss of electrical noise remained. A silence deeper than shouting settled over the formation. The bombers began subtle adjustments, huge bodies easing into the alignment for the run, turning toward the invisible axis that pointed straight at the bridge. In the cramped Mustang cockpit, Luke felt the blood drain cold from his skin. He watched the B-17s, those airborne fortresses he had shepherded for hundreds of kilometers, those steel birds carrying his own countrymen, slide inexorably toward executing slaughter by procedure. The silence on the radio was louder than any rebuke. He had seen it, he had reported it, and the system, higher vantage, larger data chain, had judged his sight and interference, an error to be ignored. His eyes, the most reliable tool he owned as a fighter pilot, had been declared invalid in the logic of war. No, not entirely. A clear, icy, almost insane thought displaced anger and despair. If language couldn't penetrate, if the report would not be believed, What did a fighter pilot still have? He had this airplane. He had his own body moving through space, an undeniable physical fact. He drew a breath and switched to his wingman's frequency. "Tom, cover me. Don't ask why." A short, confused response crackled back. "Roger!" Luke stomped rudder and pressed the stick. Sentinel-1 slid out of its escort slot with a sharp, deliberate side slip. He was not turning toward enemy fighters. He was not beginning a standard maneuver. Like a silver meteor, he dove toward the front of the formation, toward the line between the bombers and the bridge, the still-forming extension of their aim. The Merlin howled at full power. Speed surged. Altitude fell in a rush. The move was so fast, so unexpected, that several B-17 crews thought at first he had spotted German fighters. Then they realized Luke's P-51 did not fire. It made no attack posture. It only dove, leveled, and then, precise and menacing in its simplicity, settled directly in front of Citadel Lead, squarely on the extension of the bomb run. Sunlight struck the Mustang's smooth skin and flared blindingly. It was there, not faster, not slower, holding roughly the formation's speed, a living roadblock no one could ignore. To aim at the bridge, McCall's bombardier would first have to see the Mustang in the sight. To drop, they would have to pass over, pass through, their own fighter. Every crew in the 11 trailing B-17, nearly 100 men, saw it through plexiglass and gun ports. Even the radio seemed to stop breathing. This was accusation beyond words and the ultimate form of dissent. Luke attacked no one. Yet with his airplane, his life, he drew a physical and moral line. You can execute the order, but you will have to go through me first. Pressure became something you could feel, as if the air itself had thickened. McCall stared at the Mustang's silhouette, filling a portion of his windscreen. He could make out the star and bar on its wing. He could almost picture Luke's tense profile in that narrow canopy. The young pilot had taken an abstract ethical dilemma and smashed it into cold steel reality in front of his eyes. Seconds ticked. Fuel bled away. The formation pressed deeper into airspace that might be stitched with flak. Somewhere behind them, a clock in headquarters was tapping, waiting for the report, "Bombs away." The navigator's voice sounded dry. "Lead 20 seconds to the irreversible point. After that, if we don't drop, formation integrity will break, and probability of hit goes to 0. The co-pilot glanced at McCall, eyes tangled. "Sir, headquarters is calling again. They want immediate confirmation of attack status." On the intercom, the bombardier's voice shook. I can't get a clear aiming line. Friendly aircraft in the field." He stated a technical fact. Every word was soaked with moral weight. McCall closed his eyes, not to flee, but to find a point of purchase inside the storm. He saw the mottos from flight school, the paragraphs of the tactical manual, the arrows on maps that represented victory. In the end, what remained was Luke's desperate sentence, "They're no different from people on our streets back home," and the silver Mustang cutting across his windscreen. In that moment, he pierced through all tactical trade-offs and command pressure and touched a simpler question. As a man granted authority, trusted by his crews, bearing final responsibility, why had he brought them here? To destroy a coordinate or to win a war worth winning? If they pressed the release today, how would they face themselves tomorrow? How would they face the ideals they claimed to defend? He opened his eyes. His gaze was clear, heavy but unshakably clear. He reached for the microphone. In the cockpit, it felt as if even the engines were holding their breath. "All units, this is Citadel Lead." His voice traveled to every headset without tremor, no excitement, no hesitation, only the clean finality of a decision made. "Abort the bombing, Repeat, abort the bombing, pull up immediately, and break off the current run. Reform. We're going home." After McCall's words fell, the radio held a silence deeper than before. No argument, no cheer, no audible relief, only the constant massive roar of 12 Wright engines and 2 Merlins at altitude, filling every ear and every hollow space inside every man. The formation moved. Citadel Lead lifted its nose and began a slow, firm turn to the left. One by one, the other B-17s followed, like a flock that had abruptly changed its migratory path. The bomb bay doors, which had been opened for the run, were cranked shut again by the flight engineers. The heavy mechanical clack locked the steel inside that had been meant to fall into a human crush. Navigators recalculated the return route, angling around known flak zones. Engineers checked consumption, those extra minutes, and the altered track tightened the margins, but they were still within safe limits. Procedure returned, only now its destination was not a success point, but an airfield full of questions. Luke watched the bombers turn away. His fingers clenched so hard they had begun to cramp, slowly loosen on the stick. For minutes he had felt suspended outside time, every nerve and ounce of will concentrated into a single act: block them. Now the brutal force that had held him up drained away, leaving exhaustion and the aftertaste of fear. He realized what he had done: open disobedience, using a fighter to obstruct a friendly formation's bomb run. In any military code, it was enough to be shot down in the air or hauled before a court afterward. He glanced at his fuel gauge, forced his breathing steady, and guided the Mustang in a wide, careful arc back toward escort position. His wingman, Sentinel-2, slid in behind him in silence. On the radio, Tom said nothing about what he'd seen. He only said, short and flat, "I'll watch your 6." It was silent support, understanding without words. Luke swallowed hard. "Thanks," he managed. The return flight felt endless. The sunlight remained sharp. Clouds drifted below. The geography of southern France unrolled beneath their wings. But everything looked coated in ash compared to the outbound leg. No one made small talk. Normally, after a mission, the channel would loosen. Jokes, replays of close calls, arguments about what dinner might be at the mess. Now there was only necessary navigation exchange, voices dry and stripped of color. Each man sank into his own mind. Bombardiers stared blankly at closed sights. Gunners looked out from their turrets as if they didn't see the landscape. Co-pilots checked the same instruments again and again, hands moving out of habit. A shared but unspoken mix of shame, confusion, relief, and fear spread through the formation. They had avoided becoming direct executioners of a massacre, but they had also failed. The 8th Air Force patch still rode their jackets, the motto about air power still stitched into their identity, yet they had refused to use that power. The paradox gnawed at them. In Citadel Lead, McCall sat rigidly upright. He dictated a detailed encrypted report back to base, concise and clinical, due to the unexpected presence of a large number of non-combatants in the target area, and based on avoidance of civilian casualties and a reassessment of mission efficacy, the attack was aborted and the formation returned. He deliberately omitted Luke's act of physically blocking the run. He emphasized only that it had been a commander's decision made after weighing available information. He knew it did not change the nature of what had happened, but he placed the full weight of it on his own shoulders. Now and then his co-pilot glanced at him, wanting to speak. McCall did not. His mind was already at the airfield, at the interrogation rooms, at the reports and reviews that would follow. He did not regret the decision. In that moment, it had been the only choice available to him as a human being and as a commander. But he also knew, with clear eyes, what it would be called inside a military system built on discipline and hierarchy, an error that carried a price. When the gray line of the English coast finally appeared on the horizon, home brought no warmth. It only tightened the string further. The tower guided them in with a businesslike voice. One by one, the B-17S lowered landing gear, wheels kissed the runway and smoked, then rolled toward the dispersal area. Engines shut down in sequence. The great propellers slowed and stopped. On most days, ground crews would rush out cheering. Men would climb from hatches, tired and grinning. Today, the atmosphere was visibly different. At the edge of the hard stand stood military police in MP armbands and a few officers with hard faces. They did not approach. They only watched each aircraft taxi in, still as statues. Luke and Tom's Mustangs landed on the fighter strip. They had barely rolled into their assigned parking when a Jeep arrived. 2 MPs climbed out and walked to Luke's aircraft. One looked up at him still in the cockpit, raised a hand in salute, and spoke in a flat tone. "Lieutenant Harper, report to headquarters. Your personal effects will be collected later." Luke removed his helmet and unbuckled. Sweat had soaked his flight suit undershirt. Now it lay cold against his back. He climbed down. When his boots hit the hard ground, his legs felt strange, almost floating. He didn't look at the distant stares from ground crew or other pilots. He simply followed the MPs to the Jeep. Before he stepped in, he glanced back at Sentinel-1. The silver fuselage carried streaks of dust and oil from the long flight, still sleek, still powerful in the afternoon sun. It was the same aircraft that had drawn that impossible line in the air minutes earlier. Luke turned away and climbed into the Jeep. McCall went through a similar routine. As he came down the crew ladder with his men, a staff officer met him with a salute and the immediate order to report for debrief. McCall nodded once to his crew and followed the officer without a word. The remaining 9 crewmen stood where they were, watching their commander's back, then looking at one another with unease still written across their faces. The war was not over, but their crew story had abruptly entered an unfamiliar branch. The days that followed were long, detailed, and suffocating with pressure. Luke and McCall were questioned separately. Investigators drilled down on everything: weather conditions, visibility, recon altitude, every recorded line of radio traffic, formation positions, fuel state, even each man's psychological state. They made Luke describe what he had seen again and again, searching for evidence of possible misperception. They pressed McCall on why, after receiving explicit pressure from higher headquarters, he still made a decision that violated orders. They asked whether personal factors had interfered. Gradually, the focus shifted from were there really people on the bridge to what procedure should a commander follow when intelligence conflicts with eyewitness reporting, and what are the boundaries of a fighter pilot's conduct when he believes a commander's decision will create severe moral consequences. When the court convened, the atmosphere was solemn. Luke and McCall wore immaculate uniforms, but their shoulder boards and wings had been temporarily removed. Each gave his account of what had happened. Luke's statement remained clear and unwavering. He described the faces, emphasized the fatal intelligence error, and openly admitted that he had blocked the bomb run out of urgency to prevent catastrophe. He said he would accept whatever consequences followed. McCall framed his statement around command judgment. In the limited time available, he said, he weighed the meaninglessness of killing civilians, the risk of striking a friendly aircraft, doubts about the mission's actual military value under changed conditions, and his ultimate responsibility as formation commander for all information presented, including Luke's report. He affirmed that aborting the bombing was his decision and that he would accept full responsibility. Neither man tried to blame the other. During cross-examination, when an investigator suggested Luke's maneuver had coerced McCall, McCall rejected it outright. Lieutenant Harper's action was a strong signal, but my decision was based on my independent judgment as formation commander. His action made the weight of that decision clearer, but it did not make the decision for me. When Luke was asked whether his act constituted disobedience, he replied, "Yes, sir, but I believe that in certain circumstances the moral legitimacy of an order fails. My duty is to protect the bomber formation. That day I believed protecting the formation from committing a war crime was a higher priority duty." The final judgment did not convict them of war crimes or mutiny. The tribunal acknowledged the possibility of major intelligence failure and partially accepted that in extreme time pressure a commander must have some discretion. But the written decision also stated plainly, Lieutenant Luke Harper, by using dangerous maneuvering to obstruct a formation during mission execution, had severely violated flight discipline and operational regulations. Major James McCall, by canceling a confirmed attack mission without higher authorization and without official correction of intelligence, had committed disobedience. Both men were deemed no longer suitable for current combat flying duties. Luke was reassigned to a rear training command as a primary flight instructor. McCall was transferred to a transport unit responsible for non-combat supply routes across the North Atlantic. The incident went into their records. A few months later, the war ended. Hitler committed suicide. Germany surrendered. The fighting in Europe went out. Streamers and crowds flooded streets. The grand narrative remembered Normandy, the Ardennes, Berlin. It remembered the atom bomb and the signatures on the deck of the Missouri. James McCall retired as a colonel. He did not remain in aviation. He went back to his hometown and taught history at an ordinary middle school. He sealed the memory of war away and rarely spoke of it. That morning in August, the ruthless southern French sunlight, the argument in his headset, the silhouette of a silver Mustang across his windscreen, the long investigation and silent reassignment afterward, became a complex private knot deep inside him. He never considered himself a hero. More often he wondered if the intelligence had been correct, if the bridge truly had been packed with German armor. Would his decision have become a mistake that cost Allied soldiers more blood? Choices in war were rarely black and white. They were shades of gray, and his single decision had been painted with the darkest pigment. One autumn afternoon, more than 20 years later, McCall sat in his study. Outside, yellow leaves drifted down. He idly flipped through an out-of-date issue of the New York Times when a tiny item in the international corner caught his eye. The headline read, "French Town Marks Old Bridge's Lucky Day." The news brief was short. It said that a small town in southern France, Saint-Julien, on a tributary of the Rhone, had held a modest commemorative gathering at a late 19th century railway bridge. The bridge had been designated a bombing target during the war, but had luckily not been destroyed, and it remained part of the local landscape. The report quoted an elderly resident's recollection. In August 1944, they were all packed onto the bridge trying to flee north. Then they heard aircraft overhead, loud, many of them. They were terrified and thought they were going to die. Then the plane circled for a while and finally flew away. They never understood why. Later, someone said maybe American pilots had seen them. Who knew? But they lived. McCall set the paper down, removed his reading glasses, and sat very still for a long time. The study was quiet except for the tick of an old clock. He looked out the window, and his gaze seemed to pass through years and oceans back into that pitilessly blue sky over France. He saw the heavy, determined B-17. He saw the agile, resolute P-51. And he saw, below the bridge, people he had never personally laid eyes on, whose lives nevertheless continued because of a young pilot's shout and a commander's heavy decision. The news item's bland word, luckily, hid what it had taken. The scream in the radio, the confrontation in the line of sight, the silent decision before fuel ran down, and 2 lives bent onto different courses. War destroyed countless bridges. It reshaped countless lives. Yet some things, fragile and stubborn, endured. A surviving old bridge, a town's blurred memory passed down through generations, a glimmer of professional conscience and human light that fought to appear in the cracks where institutions roared. That light was not enough to illuminate the whole darkness of war, but it had been enough on that one day to stop a flight of steel birds and keep the bomb release button silent. That in itself was a small concrete footnote, weighty as stone to the question of what men were fighting for. McCall let out a quiet breath, a breath he seemed to have held for more than 20 years, woven with responsibility, cost, and uncertainty, finally found a place to rest. History books most often wrote of gunfire and conquest. Life itself sometimes existed in the terms that were never written down.